Welcome to the SoilCraft Regen Agronomy Podcast. At SoilCraft, our mission is to innovate and lead in the field of regenerative agronomy, forging a path that empowers farmers to produce food that nourishes and heals both the planet and its inhabitants. Welcome to the SoilCraft weekly Regen podcast. We don't exactly have a title yet. I'm actually in studio with Craig, but this is going to be likely a more rare occurrence. We're going to do it when we can. But we want to bring to you, Craig mentioned to me quite a while ago, hey, I think there's a good idea for this podcast. So I said, well, okay, that's great, but I haven't done it. And so he kind of goaded me and said, when are we going to do that? Let's do it together. Oh, that's even better. Now I have an excuse. So what we're trying to do is bring you a weekly podcast, a short form, nothing long, I don't think, on what's going on in either the regen space or just the ag space that we're in. We find there's a lot of groups we're part of, and just an instance throughout our own week in our own crops or whatever, where there's this topic that comes up and it leaves us, having a conversation and feeling like I really would like other people to hear about this, but those chat rooms, if you will, or whatever, are maybe not always the most productive space to share them. So we bring you this week in Regen. So
not that either of us minds being the villain, but some of the conventional spaces don't really, have conducive spaces for being the villain all the times.
Exactly. So, this is our first installment, and it comes from such a circumstance this last week. There was an instance that came up in one of the ag groups on a herbicide residual, one in fact that Craig is familiar with. So if you can give, it's a mouthful of a chemistry. You give some of the names.
Yeah, I mean it's Sulfur, and so I think it's known as Hammer, maybe Contour Plus. Anyway, it's used in soybeans primarily. Resolve has it as an ingredient in its combo. And so, yeah, I mean, when I saw the comment, I was like, yeah, I think I remember this, unfortunately. And so, for me, the brush with it was, we were spraying it in the combo in soybeans, and I sent the guys out to do spray a second pivot, and they said, there's no chemical left. And I said, well, that's not possible. I ordered 60 liters of imidazopyr, and it's in the chemical room. And the rate to apply was 600 mLs per hectare, and it had got applied at 6 liters per hectare. And it's one of the most persistent residuals that affects wheat. And of course, wheat is our cash crop. Soybeans is sometimes an annoyance, sometimes an entertainment. And so, I was in despair. That's for us about $60,000 worth of wheat, kind of flushed down the toilet for who knows how long, because that's 10 times the rate we were intending to apply. And so we had to find out, is there a way to redeem it post soybeans? And so that's kind of what launched us into having that conversation about it. And so maybe for us about it, we ended up doing is calling around and thinking about what options we had. And at the point of not growing wheat, you have a lot of options because you have nothing to start with. So we said, well, let's try some stuff. So we put down a pretty significant dose of micronized gypsum, try to open up pore structure, and then we also applied around 4 kgs a hectare of humic acid to try to help impact that. And amazingly, to my shock, actually, to the testament to the resilience of the world, we did grow a significant wheat crop there, and we couldn't see any residual effect the following season. But we did have to water it and grow cover crops, those kind of things in between.
Yeah, so like many different herbicides, you can have a range of period of time for that residual, if you will, and this one's no exception. You've got the high side or the low side, it could be persistent for 20 days on the low side, and all conditions ideal, moist, etc. That being in a label rate. For an over application, that definitely throws us farther And then, some of the conditions that make it more persistent would be a low pH and dry soils, so.
Which is so common here. Low pH soils is the norm, and that then dry. And I think like this year, the guy that got into trouble, we had rain for really consistently for 2 months. And so you apply it and then you're into dry. And so the breakdown period became short.
This can be nothing almost. And so, what's interesting is we were discussing this and we're saying, well, look, there's the chemistry side of things, the chemistry, which can be, we consider minerals and carbon substances to be regenerative. They're natural. It's what's in the soil matrix between humus and the soil minerals, et cetera. That's natural. So still a natural process. So there's the chemistry side, which would be your humic acid, your gypsum, your other minerals and other things. Even, azomite or some of those could be thrown in there. But then there's the biologic side. Now, interestingly enough, it's not just one or the other. Because, humic acid from a chemical standpoint, is a very good binder of sorts because it's carbon, complex rings, and it has multiple binding sites. So when you put humic acid down, it's a good place for maybe stray chemistries, stray minerals, whatever, to have a life raft to kind of bind to so that they're not really engaged with other things. And then on the gypsum side, calcium is huge on a number of levels, but sulfur is actually massive in that it's a very catalytic. It's a catalyst. It's needed and required from many different chemical reactions and exchanges. It's a very strong anion. On its own, S8. It actually has a valence potential of 6, meaning you can go to -4 and +2. So sulfur is like the great catalyst. Apart from oxygen and hydrogen, is probably the most catalytic elements in agriculture, and I would argue in all living systems. And so then it bridges. You can see sulfur is a great bridge into the biological side, the living side, because sulfur is required for to produce glutathione and glutamate and other essential amino acids. And we know with microbes, it's required to a certain level, and when we have a sufficient rate, the soil microorganisms that can help degrade these are able to do their job better. But that being said, that's a bridge and a segue to kind of another way to look at it. And so I would argue that putting on humic acid and gypsum is a more chemistry approach to the problem, but a good one. When we have it's based on living natural systems. But then something that I'd like to mention, though, that we see is the power of harnessing those beneficial microorganisms. And we see study after study. And we know when there's oil spills, for instance, what are they using these days? They're using beneficial microbes to break those down. And generally speaking, a lot of those, oddly enough, a lot of the time for those beneficial microbes that work, but the chemistry, the chemical, the bad guy is a food source, which is hard for us to think. There's actually some really interesting work done by some of the godfathers of regen, where they actually talk about the benefit of oil spills or diesel spills on the farm, that it actually fed beneficial organisms. I'm kind of like, ooh, dare we talk about that? And so what we found time and time again is that using beneficial soil microorganisms with a food source to help feed those, because look, they don't work for free, will reduce half-life of chemistries massive. And so something to note, that glyphosate, not disclaimer, I'm not saying that this has been proven. I don't want to say that. But I will say that it has been proven that fusarium is a degrader of NPA, which is what glyphosate degrades to. And so just
taking us down the rabbit hole. So when you spray glyphosate too close to your crop, if you choose to do that, and you wonder why you have more fusarium in your wheat, it's because it was there to clean up the glyphosate, and your wheat remains to be fed on after the glyphosate has been broken down. So anyway, just
a painful truth. No, it's true though. I mean, there are very few natural organisms, soil microorganisms in most agricultural soils left to degrade well. And fusarium is one of them. And so, yeah, it's a bit of a double-edged sword there. Now, I'd say that the caveat, I believe, is, and, I say that's probably the most prevalent organism in our soil that's left in conventionally farmed or even just monoculture, traditional type crop settings that will do it. That's not to say there aren't many other beneficial microorganisms that will, but they're probably not just in high amounts in our soils because our conditions are really harmful to them. And I think that's one of the main reasons we see such benefits when we use aerobic microbial teas on diverse sources. Chiefly one of the easiest and one of our favorites, high quality worm castings. All the classes that are listed there are known to degrade chemicals, including the one we're discussing today. And we'll put links in the show notes to some of those studies, those peer-reviewed studies that show, in fact, Pseudomonas, Actinomycetes, etc. These all break down this chemical we're speaking of. Now,
high quality,
for free.
High quality.
So we really believe, okay, let's eat, but then let's support it with like what we use our product Soil Vigor. Why? Because it has a molasses food source. It has biochar. And biochar is much like humic acid in that it's a carbon source, which has binding sites. But we use micronized biochar, which is much, much, much smaller than a humic acid. Very small, very absorbent. And you can think, if we get sick and we have toxicity, what do we often do? And you take activated charcoal, goes into our stomach, and those chemicals bind to it, rendered inert, and can be eliminated. And so we see the same thing. You can see it in livestock. Animals will do it on their own in the wild. And it's no different. We look at the soil, it's much like the stomach of a cow, So that's something that we used to be as probably so what's the best strategy? Well, and we them all, right? Make sure we can apply humic acid, we can apply gypsum, we can apply soil microbial teas, we can apply a beneficial soil and wheeling. And boy, I just described, and we 80% of the SoilCraft program, because it's not about a silver bullet, it's about cropping systems, right?
And I think, if you break that down, you basically we talked about chemistry, but you're saying, hey, I've got a problem. You discover it happened. Let me immediately take action on the soil. Now you're saying, oh, I've got a crop that's now suffering. Okay, now what do we do? Well, you're going to bind up as much of it as you can through the humics and the carbon-based sources. You're going to deal with your plant, and that's where, if you can get foliar, pharmaceutical grade carbon systems, like what's in some of the leaf products, that actually helps to extract chemistry and imbalances out of the plant itself. And you can actually see that in the sap analysis, that you can literally extract some of the chemistry out of those plants. And then you have, put the microbes on and accelerate the breakdown. And so, your carbons now are binding to a poison. So it's present in the soil in an inactive form longer, but the microbes then you bring in to take it out. And so one is bind it up, two is get my plant back to a healthier state, and three is eliminate it from the system.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. The beauty of it is this is actually a bit of a regenerative way to deal with a symptom, which we try not to do, but it happens. It happens. You have over applications, etc. And it's nice to know that there's a way to deal with it acutely. But then the other exciting thing is, again, these prescriptions are basically aspects of what we consider our crop program. So imagine if this is business as usual with what you're doing this as a crop program, then all of a sudden these residuals are likely going to be maybe even a non-issue, or at least one that you don't have to worry about. Meaning, what I mean by that is you can rest assured that if you're doing these things, whatever the label says, and yield will likely respond as the label prescribes, and it will help take care of some of those outliers. Maybe your low pH, maybe your dry seasons, etc. It will allow your systems to act and behave better, or as well as the label says, and maybe even better. You might even see those things working better, giving you more freedom.
It reminds me, recently I was watching a video, and there's this mountain biker right on the knife edge of, I'm assuming it was a mountain in Switzerland or something, riding this ridiculous thing. And I think in farming we find ourselves, we say we're living between the devil and the deep blue sea a lot. You're always making this decision, but it affects that decision. And the nice thing is, if you're doing the right regenerative things, if you're following those principles, the chance that you have both your feet on the ground instead of you're standing on one foot, one toe, leaning on the top of the mountain, and any little wind blows you off. The reality is we live in a world where things happen, and you actually get much less demanding from a reactive management standpoint, and you get to be more demanding on the proactive management standing. It just makes farming a lot more fun in the season.
Yeah, that's right. You get more resiliency. And this is a great segue into our next podcast, next weekly podcast, which I'd like to tackle and call, so what are you really so against in conventional agriculture anyway? Or I'd like to just explore for a brief period, why does it sound like I'm just so against the conventional way? And in fact, I think I would argue that I'm not against using proven tools. I'm just against the consequences that come with them and the hamster wheel that it puts you on. So join us next week as we talk about that.
So in other words, all the egg junkies, get your popcorn out. Next week's going out.
All right. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned. Please leave comments, subscribe, etc. But please leave us your topics as well. We're going to do our best to tackle things as they're coming. But that's not to say if you have something you'd like to tackle this week in Regen where you are, please give us a suggestion so we can tackle what's happening in your neck of the woods. Thanks so much for joining us as we expand our paradigms and explore what's possible in the realm of regen agronomy. If you would like to contact us or learn more about what we do, please visit our website at www.soilcraft.com, as well as our YouTube channel. If you have topics you would like us to unpack or stories, please connect with us so that we can share them with others.